Ethan Miller did not expect anything unusual that Sunday evening. Yet the air already felt restless as dusk settled over the quiet Oregon street, the kind of calm that makes a person uneasy without knowing why. And he was still standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, thinking about nothing important at all when the first knock came, firm but careful, as if the person on the other side was unsure whether to enter his life or turn back. And when he opened the door, there stood Aunt Laura, neat coat, hair perfectly set, smile polite but strained, her eyes holding a tired depth Ethan had never seen before. And she stepped inside without her usual jokes, looking around the small house like she was memorizing it, sitting at the table with her hands folded while Ethan poured tea and tried to read her silence. Noticing how she watched the steam rise as if it carried answers, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm but heavy, saying she needed to talk to him soon about something personal, something important, but not tonight, asking him gently if tomorrow would be better. And before he could press her for more, she stood, touched his arm with quiet affection, and left with a soft smile that did not reach her eyes, leaving Ethan alone with questions he could not yet shape. And he barely had time to settle into his chair when the second knock came, quicker this time, louder, filled with emotion. And when he opened the door again, Aunt Margaret stood there, eyes bright with unshed tears, pulling him into a tight hug that lingered longer than usual. Her familiar warmth mixed with nervous energy, and she stepped inside, talking too fast at first, then stopping suddenly as if she had run out of breath, asking him how he was really doing since the divorce, how the house felt, how the nights treated him. And Ethan answered briefly, sensing that her concern was only a bridge to something deeper. And as they sat together in the living room, the old clock ticking loudly between them, Margaret's voice softened, telling him she needed his help, not advice from the family, not opinions from friends, but his help, because she trusted him, because he listened without judging. And she said she could not explain everything right now, only that it involved a decision she was afraid to make, one that could change her future. And she asked the same question Laura had asked an hour earlier, whether he could talk tomorrow, whether he could give her time and honesty. And when Ethan agreed, her shoulders relaxed slightly. But her eyes remained troubled, and before leaving, she paused at the door, looking back at him with a careful expression, as if measuring how much to reveal, then simply thanked him and left. And when the door closed behind her, the house felt suddenly too quiet, the silence pressing in as Ethan leaned against the wall, replaying both visits in his mind, struck by how different his aunts were and yet how similar their requests sounded. Both asking for time, both carrying worry, both choosing him as the keeper of something fragile. And he wondered why now, why on the same evening, why separately? And as he walked through the house, memories surfaced of childhood dinners where Laura organized everything and Margaret filled the room with laughter. Two women who had always seemed steady in their own ways, never uncertain, never reaching out like this. And now they had come to him, not as confident figures from his past, but as people standing at emotional crossroads. And the thought unsettled him because it mirrored his own life too closely. Its recent heartbreak, the quiet night, the questions about love he had been avoiding. And as he sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on, he felt the weight of tomorrow pressing toward him, knowing that whatever they wanted to ask would pull him into decisions that were not his to make, yet impossible to ignore. And for the first time since returning to his hometown, Ethan realized that starting over did not mean leaving the past behind. Sometimes it meant being called back into it, unexpectedly, urgently, by the people who trusted you most. And as the night deepened, One thought settled firmly in his mind, clear and unsettling, that both requests were connected in a way he did not yet understand. And once he listened, nothing in their lives, or his own, would stay the same. Asterisk the next morning arrived too quickly, and Ethan barely slept before meeting Aunt Laura at a quiet riverside cafe where the water moved steadily as if it knew where it was going. Unlike the people sitting beside it, and Laura was already there when he arrived, posture straight, expression controlled, though the faint tension in her jaw betrayed the storm underneath. And after a brief greeting, she got to the point with a calm that made her words heavier, telling Ethan she was thinking about leaving her marriage, not because of anger or betrayal, but because something vital had slowly faded, and as she spoke, she described a life built on responsibility and habit. Years of shared routines that once felt safe but now felt empty, explaining how she and Uncle Robert had grown polite, careful, distant, like two people sharing space instead of a life. And Ethan listened closely, surprised by how steady her voice remained even as she admitted she felt lonely in a house that was never quiet. And she told him about reconnecting with a man named Thomas. Someone she had loved deeply before adulthood scattered them in different directions, clarifying quickly that nothing improper had happened, that their connection lived in letters and conversations filled with memories and honesty. But those words had awakened parts of her she thought were gone forever, making her question whether she had chosen comfort over truth all those years ago. And she slid a thin folder across the table toward Ethan. Explaining it held printed emails and handwritten notes. Not secrets meant to hide, but thoughts she needed someone else to witness. And she asked him to read them, not to judge her or push her toward a decision, but to tell her whether he believed she was chasing the past or finally listening to her heart. And the request stunned him because Laura had always been the one who gave answers, not the one who asked for them. And as he flipped through the pages, he felt the weight of her trust pressing into his hands, each letter filled with reflection, warmth, and a quiet longing that felt both hopeful and sad. And Laura watched him carefully, admitting she was afraid of being selfish, afraid of hurting a man who had not wronged her, afraid of starting over, at an age when most people were settling into certainty. And yet she was more afraid of staying silent for the rest of her life. And Ethan realized this was not about Thomas alone, but about Laura reclaiming a voice she had buried under years of duty. And when she paused, staring out at the river, she asked him to promise one thing: to keep this conversation private, especially from Margaret, explaining that her sister would worry, judge, or try to protect her in ways that would cloud the truth. And Ethan agreed, though the promise felt heavier than he expected. And as they left the cafe, Laura thanked him not for his advice, but for his presence, telling him that sometimes being heard was more powerful than being saved. And as she walked away, shoulders squared but steps uncertain, Ethan remained standing by the river, the folder tucked under his arm, feeling the strange shift of roles as the dependable aunt of his childhood placed her future in his hands. And he felt an uneasy pull between loyalty and honesty, knowing that whatever he told her could change not just her marriage, but the shape of their entire family. And as he drove home, his mind raced, not only with Laura's story, but with echoes of his own failed relationship. The quiet compromises, the moments he had ignored his instincts for the sake of peace, and he understood then why Laura had come to him, why she trusted him with such a fragile truth. Because he knew what it meant to lose yourself slowly, and as the river disappeared in his rearview mirror, one clear thought settled in his chest: that this was only the first truth he would be asked to carry, and whatever came next would demand more courage than he felt ready to give. Asterisk that evening, Ethan drove across town to Aunt Margaret's house with Laura's words still echoing in his mind, the sky darkening as streetlights flickered on. And the familiar home felt different the moment he stepped inside, quieter, heavier, as if it too was waiting for something to be said, and Margaret greeted him with a tired smile that faded as soon as they sat down, wasting no time before admitting she was standing at a crossroads, explaining that she had been seeing a man named Daniel for over a year. Someone patient and kind who brought calm instead of chaos into her life. And now Daniel wanted to move forward to build something steady, while she felt caught between hope and fear. And as she spoke, her words spilled quickly, revealing a history of love that had always arrived loud and left her wounded. Two marriages that taught her passion did not guarantee safety, and a long season of loneliness that followed. And she confessed that Daniel's quiet certainty scared her more than heartbreak ever had, because choosing him meant trusting happiness could last. And she admitted she kept thinking of Ethan's mother, her sister, who believed deeply in love even when it demanded courage. And she wondered aloud whether she still had that kind of faith. And then Margaret made her request, asking Ethan to tell her honestly whether he thought she was strong enough to try again, whether stepping into another commitment was brave or foolish. And she said she did not want approval from the family, only clarity from someone who had seen love fail and survive. And when Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully, she surprised him further by asking if he would walk her down the aisle if she said yes, not because tradition demanded it, but because she trusted his presence. And the weight of her trust settled heavily on him, pressing against the promise he had already made to Laura. And as Margaret watched his face closely, she sensed there was more he was holding back, asking quietly if Laura had spoken to him too. And the room went still as Ethan realized how thin the line between honesty and betrayal had become, and he chose silence, neither confirming nor denying, which Margaret accepted with a knowing nod, understanding more than she said. And she admitted that part of her fear came from watching Laura stay in a marriage that slowly lost its warmth, a life that looked stable from the outside but felt empty inside, and she worried she might make the opposite mistake, chasing peace so carefully that she missed passion entirely. And Ethan listened, recognizing the same questions shaping both sisters' lives. One wondering if it was too late to leave, the other wondering if it was too risky to stay. And as the clock ticked loudly in the background, Margaret confessed that she was tired of living halfway, tired of letting fear decide for her, yet still unsure whether love required risk or restraint. And she asked Ethan one final time to be honest when the moment came, not to protect her feelings, but to respect her strength. And as he left her house later that night, the air felt heavier, the road darker. And Ethan realized he was no longer just a listener, but a bridge between two women facing opposite choices, each believing he held the answer. And as he drove home, he understood the cruel balance forming around him, knowing that helping one might hurt the other, and that the hardest part was not choosing sides, but accepting that love rarely offers clean answers, only moments where courage must speak louder than fear. Weeks passed in a blur of quiet tension, and Ethan found himself back in the heart of the family home one evening for a simple dinner that felt anything but ordinary. The table set with familiar dishes, but every glance across it carrying the weight of unspoken decisions. As Laura and Margaret sat on opposite sides, their expressions calm yet edged with anticipation, and the room was filled with the soft clinking of utensils and the low hum of conversation that carried memories of childhood summers and shared laughter. Yet beneath it all, a subtle gravity pulled at Ethan's attention, reminding him of the promises he had made and the secrets he held. And after the meal, Laura cleared her throat and spoke first, voice steady but softer than usual, announcing that she had decided to leave her marriage, not out of anger or rebellion, but because staying had become an act of comfort at the cost of truth. And she explained how the letters with Thomas had reminded her of who she once was and who she still could be, and how she owed herself the courage to face that truth. And as she spoke, Margaret reached out to hold her hand, tears forming, but no judgment passing between them. Just a quiet understanding that each woman was choosing her own path. And then Margaret took a deep breath, standing with a grace that belied her nervousness, and declared that she had said yes to Daniel, acknowledging the fear she felt, but also the joy and hope that came from choosing love again. And she thanked Ethan quietly, as if sharing her courage with him, for listening and giving her the honesty she needed to move forward. And Ethan felt the tension he had carried for weeks slowly ease, replaced by a sense of awe at the bravery of both women, realizing that he had witnessed something rare. The raw strength it took to face life's turning points without guidance, only trust, and the room seemed to breathe with them. The air lighter, the past gently folding into the present as Laura and Margaret looked at each other and smiled. Sisters again, connected by honesty rather than silence. And Ethan understood then that his role had never been about choosing sides or giving advice, but simply being present, a witness to the pivotal moments of their lives. And the house that had felt so heavy on his first visit now seemed warmer, filled with the kind of quiet hope that grows when people dare to be true to themselves. And later, as the night deepened and the family slowly left, Ethan sat alone by the window, watching the river reflect the soft glow of moonlight, thinking about how courage often arrives in small steps, how love sometimes asks us to risk more than we imagine, and how two women he had always seen as strong had taught him the most about bravery and honesty. And he realized that the unbelievable requests they had brought to him weeks ago were never about him making decisions for them, but about helping them hear themselves, feel their own hearts, and take control of the lives they had almost let slip away. And as he looked at the empty streets and listened to the distant rush of water, Ethan understood that life was often like that, a series of moments where fear and hope collide, and the right choice is rarely easy, but always worth it. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a quiet readiness for the future, knowing that the lessons of that night, the trust and courage he had witnessed, would stay with him forever, guiding him not only in how to support others, but in how to open his own heart again, to accept that love, even when uncertain, can be a gift that shapes every path ahead, and that sometimes the most unbelievable requests are not burdens, but invitations to see life and the people we love more clearly than ever before.